and presentation skills. I'm delighted to welcome back Gerry Duffy to the Union Business Studio. Hiya, Gerry.
Hi, Alec. Delighted to be here. And I think you'll give me a second chance. I think that's.
I'm giving you a second chance. Yeah. I'm not going to drag it, but I will introduce something because you were the man. 32 marathons, 32 counties, and that sort of really impressed a lot of our audience the last time about the goal setting around that. Maybe. Well, I don't want to drag you into this because I know they're asking about it all the time, but that's very important about goal setting. Tell us what you're doing with the corporate world of goal setting these days.
Yeah, so thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah, so I guess every company wants to get somewhere, but very often, I think one of the core things that maybe needs improvement in companies is the quality of communication, because very often, you have teams of people working on things, but they're not aligned perhaps on the vision. So I think one of the greatest things that a leader can do is, obviously identify the vision and maybe a collaborative vision, but also communicate the vision effectively through the quality of the communication. And in terms of goal setting, I've learned through my own experiences, I've achieved things in my own world, like, the 32 marathons in 32 days, or even overcoming a pathological fear of public speaking and turning that into a business. Yeah. I've learned the principles. For me, they were very, very, very big goals, but the principles of how I achieve my goals are the kind of things, that I love to speak about in companies, the different strategies I've learned, whether they're for a personal ambition like the marathons, or whether it's to drive a company from A to B, wherever it might get to. So talking about goal setting principles, but you'd be amazed how often even, very simple things that we might take for granted doesn't necessarily mean that they're done to a very high standard. So it's identifying core things, checking in on goals regularly, because sometimes we set this vision, mightn't communicate it effectively. So looking at the quality of communication, but also checking in very often. Somebody might check in every year, but why not check in every month? Even if it's just for 10 minutes or 50 minutes, to reconnect people with the vision, reconnect people with the goal. And those simple things can have a really, really big impact.
It's amazing. I'm sure you're dealing with corporates all of the time. It must be interesting for you as you look on the wall walking in and see vision or mission in some sort of picture that is stereotyped you've seen in a million other reception areas.
Yeah, and funny, another one we see very often is values. And it's one of the first things I always ask a client, what values do you have? And sometimes people would say, well, we're very clear on the values. Some people's values might be a new conversation to somebody, but values are always there. We just mightn't have identified them. And very often, we might see values on a website, but even something as simple as I might do an anonymous survey with some of the key people and say, do you know what your core values are? And then in a very nice, respectful way, just ask them to share them with me. And you'd be surprised how often it's a struggle for people to reference back the core values that are on the website, or as you said, on the wall in the reception.
And in terms of values, what do you think in this sort of modern day, and I mean, we're in a COVID pandemic world as well, what should be the key values for most organizations, or would you like to steer them in the right direction about some of these?
Well, I think, what I would certainly do is to help, the team unlock the values, because I think values can be different things to different people. And a value that might be valuable for one company might have no necessary relevance for another. But I think maybe if I had to pin my hat to one core value, I think innovation might be a core value that every business needs. Peter Drucker, the great management guru, said that the enterprise that does not innovate inevitably changes and declines. And if there was one maybe core value, that might be one that definitely would be front of mind for me.
Have you come across any sort of fantastic examples of innovation in recent months or years?
Well, I think, the last year as such, I think so many companies have, if ever we saw innovation, there's an old saying, must is a great master. And I think so many of us, certainly my business included, and I would imagine almost every business has had to innovate in some way in the last year. So they're probably in every main street in Ireland, probably every local business, every SME, even the multinationals, everybody I think has had to innovate. The word pivot is a word that we've all heard an awful lot of in the last year. And I definitely think if ever we wanted stark examples of innovation, it's literally in front of our eyes everywhere for the last 12 months. And of course, we would know some of the bigger companies that reinvent themselves or go into new markets. But, we probably could look literally within a mile of our house and we'll see a business that has had to innovate, whether it's a company that was doing a particular line of products and now is doing face masks or whatever it is, or a business like my business was very small amount of my business a year ago was online. Now 100% of my business is online. So that's where Must was a great master. But thankfully, the advances in the innovation in technology has allowed, thankfully, many businesses, not all, unfortunately, but many businesses to be able to innovate. So yeah, definitely lots of it going on 24/7 as we speak.
What do you tend to find are the barriers for innovation in organizations?
I think one of the biggest barriers I would see is, well, we've always done things this way. And maybe that, Carol Dweck in her wonderful book, Mindset, speaks about having two different kinds of mindset. She speaks about a fixed mindset and she speaks about a growth mindset. And I know in my life at one stage, I definitely used to have a fixed mindset, not overly open to change, not necessarily open to new ideas, maybe for me, not even willing to kind of stretch myself. But thankfully, over the last 20, 25 years, I've evolved into somebody that has a growth mindset. And a simple example of that might be, a willingness to get feedback from a client. Maybe not to hear the thing I want to hear, but maybe tell me some things I might need to hear. So that might be, that can be a big challenge. That can be a tough exam to pass. But even, very often I do a lot of leadership work with teams. And I heard it as recently as today, where somebody shared with me just an unwillingness of a team member to be open-minded, that they're very fixed in the way, this is the way we've always done things. And it's not that they don't realize they have to do it, it's just maybe an unwillingness to do it. And that can be very, difficult for a company, because again, if companies are like flowers, we're either growing or we're dying. And even if we refuse to innovate or refuse to have a growth mindset, well then, innovation or technology or competitors might quickly pass us out.
From your own experience, how do you tend to deal with sort of that fixed mindset when it comes from the very top in an organization?
Oh yeah, good question. I think one of the things I would do if there was a fixed mindset at the top of an organization is I would explore with a series of questions. Where do you feel the biggest challenges might be? And I might even do a survey with the entire leadership team, and ask a series of questions that kind of gets communication, gets what's in a lot of heads, out on paper. And then at least it gives us things to discuss. Some people, maybe one person, maybe the person at the very top mightn't say something that you might feel is very, very obvious, but somebody else in the team might throw up some things that might even allow for discussion. And you could even turn to the more fixed mindset person and say, oh, why do you think they might have shared that, even if that person themselves hadn't shared that? So that's one way definitely I've seen value in just asking people a series of questions, or what way do you think you want things to be in this company in 3 years' time or 4 years' time? And who do you might think you might need to become? Or what does the company need to do? What barriers are you likely to hit? And again, just I think the quality of the questions. I remember listening to a great speaker once upon a time, and he was talking about employee engagement was the subject. And he said, smart leaders give smart answers. Geniuses ask great questions. And I've learned the value of just asking questions can really kind of get us thinking, mining our minds to really look at, hard questions we might need to ask ourselves, but with the ultimate aim of everybody winning.
I've been fascinated by, when we talk about innovation, we've also talked about technology. How are you seeing people using technology? Are they able to adapt, or are they struggling?
I remember reading a report, I think it was from McKinsey's, Alec, last summer. This came out maybe June, July of last year. And it was a McKinsey's report on technology since COVID had kind of arrived at a global level, where everybody knew about COVID, which I would imagine for most people was probably, if my memory is right, around March of last year, when all of a sudden the whole world realized just what a problem we had. And the McKinsey's report, now I'm paraphrasing on something I
Sure.
read last summer, but it was along the lines, or it said something along the lines of that we've made, I think it was 5 years, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 5 years progress in, I think, 8 to 12 weeks.
All
and
right.
again, I think it goes back to that line of, because Must was a great master. And, we had to find ways to innovate. We were backed into a corner. And thankfully, you and I are recording this in one of those wonderful technology platforms that, to the best of my knowledge, did not exist 6 or 7 years ago. So definitely there, COVID has just thrown up so many, so much has happened that kind of alludes to some of the questions that you're asking now, that where we've seen things happen and rapidly change, and none more so than technology.
I think also in terms of productivity, one of the things COVID in its sort of beneficial side has allowed so many of us to step back and take stock. How are you finding that with your own clients? Have they taken that time back to reflect on their journey, to reset new goals, reset the clock?
Yeah, I certainly know I have. I definitely done it last summer because I did find myself having more time. And you speak about, innovation and technology. I know I have a particular client that I do a lot of work with, and they're now really leveraging the power of the technology they were on today, which is Zoom. And in the old world, they would have got a group of senior leaders from all over the country, all to get into the car and drive to one location. But now they're meeting on a regular basis. They could literally meet at an hour's notice, where everybody's absolutely present, everybody can be focused, and they can have a very private conversation about whatever the challenges might be. And I know that, even some of the work that myself and a colleague would do with that company, we're now doing quarterly sessions with that company where they're looking at ways to get to the next level. And I know they're doing it through the Zoom platform, because it allows them to be incredibly efficient with their time. It allows them to get their senior people together. And, if our job is to facilitate asking the right questions, but, even having that up, using that time so effectively. And that's, I guess, that's the important thinking rather than the urgent thinking. I think Stephen Covey referenced this in one of his books, making time for the important, because if we don't, we'll always have to work on the urgent.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. One of the things I've noticed as a side bonus of all of this and through Zoom is people aren't taking phone calls, whereas if you were in front of them at a desk, that might not be the case.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because I was even having a conversation with somebody just in the last week. I find myself using the phone less and less. I think 3 times last week I was on the phone, literally 3 times. But I'd say I was probably on 23 Zoom meetings, and I'm not saying, I don't think phones are going anywhere, but in terms of how we communicate, that's one example, of how things have radically changed. Like, I'm sure like you, and I'm sure lots of people listening or watching this, they're probably having 4, 5, 6, 7 Zoom meetings a day, whereas that wasn't in almost all of our lives kind of 15 or 16 months ago.
And the good thing I'm finding about the Zoom meetings is that the phones are not interrupting them, are not being allowed to interrupt them, which is actually quite a refreshing aspect.
Yeah, I can't see anybody saying, can you just pause there? I want to stop the meeting. I have to go and take a phone call. I haven't seen that happen anyway, thankfully.
Yeah, no, thankfully it's this. Listen, as we move on towards leadership, tell me, Gerry, in your mind, what does great leadership look like?
Leadership, I remember seeing it defined beautifully once upon a time, in my opinion. It's a relationship through which you influence the behavior and actions of other people. And I think for me, leadership, if I had to summarize leadership in one word, it would be the one word: relationship, the R word. And I very truly believe that, assuming a company has great products and great resources and access to great customers, what will define the success of the company, I believe, is the success of the relationships that are among the key stakeholders, usually being the team of the people in the company, and usually, the customers being 2 of the key stakeholders. And I think the quality of the relationships within the company, where because of I'm maybe inspired or communicated so effectively with my leader, I want to give my best because we've got such a great relationship. I'm sure people listening to this will have worked for leaders that didn't inspire them, didn't overly motivate them, maybe that they didn't particularly like. And yes, we were giving lots, but maybe if we were to reflect on it, maybe there was even more in us if we were inspired maybe by the leader. So for me, a leader is somebody that as was defined by that, it's a relationship through which you influence the behavior and actions of other people. And I think by your leadership skills, by your leadership style, Dan Goleman talks about the 6 styles of leadership. And the visionary, the commanding, the coaching, the democratic, the affiliative, and it's a matter of using these different styles at appropriate times, because sometimes that strong, maybe commanding approach, maybe we need that because we're in a bind, we're in trouble, so maybe we just need that sense of urgency. And other times, the coaching leader is somebody that really maybe takes time to explore and develop the people. It takes a bit more time, but Dan Goleman would contend that it's leaders who pass up a coaching style are passing up a very, very valuable tool.
I suppose one of the challenges, particularly for the larger corporates, that those who have a head office and then obviously branches all over the place, where there seems to be sometimes a breakdown in communications from head office, are what I call sort of two different cultures within the same organization. How do you see that, and how do you see the bridges being built there?
Yeah, I think it's still, you know, for me, like this is 2021, and we've never had communication technology or even opportunity like no generation has ever had the access to communication tools and devices and opportunities I think that we have. So even though somebody might be silo or in different locations, I like with the technology we have today, like if we really care about our people, we'll find ways to communicate. It's as simple as that. And you know, leaders mightn't remember, or sorry, people that we're leading might remember what we say, but they'll always remember how we make them feel. So how can we really make our people feel special? It might just be sending a personal email. It might be just writing them a card or picking up the phone call. It could be, you know, it's amazing. Any of the great leaders I've studied, they're doing really simple things, but they do them to an outstanding level.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Anybody in particular you would see as a hero or champion of sort of good style of leadership?
I think that there's lots of great examples of leaders out there. And again, leader, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's leading a 5,000 employees. You know, you can see leaders walking down the street every day. You can see leaders in your local community. You can see leaders in a sporting environment. I think one of the great qualities of a leader is, you know, what are they like when things are going wrong, when things are difficult? I think that's a great quality in a leader. Who stands out, you know, and one that stands out for me definitely in the last year has been Jacinda Ardern. I think she's the New Zealand Prime Minister, and she definitely has stood out for me in terms of her calmness, her empathy, her constant quality of communication. And so definitely she would be one. And another leader that I've watched from afar is Pat Lam, the former Connacht rugby coach. Again, somebody, I just saw the difference he made when he went in there and just really supported and just got the very, very best. I think he was there for 3 or 4 years, but really helped them to get to the next level. And on the outside looking in, it certainly looks like quality of relationships was something that he certainly seems to have done to an exceptional level.
Okay, I mean, we've been talking about goal setting, we're talking about leadership, but it naturally leads into, and there seems to be a common theme here in relation to communications. I know you work with a lot of companies around presentation skills, but that's about communications. Tell me more about the sort of work you're doing there and why it's so vital for people these days.
So one of the questions I ask quite a lot is, I run this event called Speaker School, and it's a one-day workshop where we help people bring their communication up to a higher level. But I often ask people in a random audience, who here sees themselves as a professional speaker? And nobody will usually put up their hand. But I have a belief that most of us are professional speakers. But we might be a sales manager, we might be leading a team, we might be a CEO of a small business, you know, we might be working in a construction company that tenders for contracts, you know, so the person who tenders for contracts in a company, in many ways, I believe, now I know I mean a little bit strong in terms of professional speaker, I know they won't see themselves, but here's what I do believe: the quality of their communication skills will determine, I believe, very often how successful that company is, because if their communication is so brilliant at those, when they're tendering for those contracts, well, then they're going to win contracts that's going to make them successful. But any leaders listening to this, you know, if they're trying to influence the behavior and actions of other people, if they're communicating a vision, if they're giving town halls to 50 people or 500 people on a regular basis in terms of the employees, if they're doing kind of, you know, leadership meetings with the leadership team, you know, their communication skills, their presentation skills are unbelievably important. But I think, having worked with hundreds and hundreds of people that have to give presentations for a living, including myself, it's my entire business is standing up in front of people. You know, the quality of my communication directly impacts the success of my business. But a couple of things I definitely see on a regular basis, Alec, where, you know, simple things that we still, I think, have significant room for improvement in is, in terms of our communication skills, it's communicating through our own view of the world. Right. And, you know, there's a great quote from George Bernard Shaw, the Irish playwright. He said, The problem with communication is the illusion that the communication has taken place.
Yeah.
And very often I see, because sometimes, you know, senior leaders will send me presentations and ask me to support them with it. And I see them communicating through their view of the world. A simple example, they might, like, notice I explained who George Bernard Shaw was there. I didn't just assume that everybody here would know that he was the Irish playwright. So that's a simple, subtle thing that I put into that communication, because it's very important, because some people listening to this mightn't be aware of who he is. But that message also transcends into, if we're doing a work presentation, and it's, for example, using acronyms.
Yes.
You know, and we use acronyms as if everybody in the audience understands them. So that's a big thing that we speak to people about. And also, one of the biggest things I see in presentations is people saying too many words in a presentation. I would usually, if somebody came to me to work with them on a presentation, and I always say, can you send me through the first draft? And usually by the time we're finished working with them over 2 or 3 sessions, whatever it might be, at least 40, if not 50% of the words go, they leave. But the whole, why do we do that? Because we want to make the messages so obvious, so clear, and give people that extra. They might still take the 10 minutes for the presentation, say half as many words, but it's the standard of the communication, it's the quality of the communication. It's when we interview the people a week later, what did they share with you at that presentation? Everybody clearly gets what the leader was trying to communicate. And so there are 2 big things I see in most presentations. And writing it through their view of the world, or communicating through their view of the world, and speaking way too many words.
Yes, and people. There's another challenge, of course, that we all have as professional speakers. In this is people's shortage of attention span, and competing with that.
Yeah. So one of the things I encourage people to do, and we teach in speaker school, is, you know, an audience that is involved is an audience that is engaged. And, you know, I appreciate every presentation is different, and some people say, why on earth would I involve my audience? But I talk about 3 different levels of involvement. There's like a shallow end engagement, there's a mid pool, and there's a deep end. And a deep end might be where you send your team off for 10 minutes to think about a question that you might ask them. A shallow end might be who here, like a who here type question. Who here is clear on the vision? That's a shallow end engagement. But an audience that is involved is an audience that is engaged. Simply by asking people a simple question like that, they don't even realize that they're actually now in the presentation. It's a subtle thing, but a very impactful thing. And it definitely also helps, as you said, to keep people's attention.
I think one of the greatest challenges are those who have so much to contribute. Often in organizations are often the ones who are the most silent because they're afraid to engage. Have you any tips for them?
I remember being in a room with a leader, and this is a number of years ago, and it was a 1-hour meeting, and after 48 minutes, no other voice in the room had been heard. And I was watching, I was just watching through my own experience of good communication. I was watching the engagement of the audience, and they were getting less and less and less motivated, less and less connected, less and less interested. To the point that after 48 minutes, it was like, I think some of them were asleep, but they just had their eyes open. But I think they were, but the moral of that story is there was just, there was nothing there for them. It was just speaking one way. And I believe leadership particularly is a 2-way communication, because, if it's all about you, you're always going to have to be there. And, if you only ever hear your own voice, you will only ever know what you already know. So it's about, I think one of the best things a leader can do is to invite opinions of other people. They may not be right, but at least respect, other people's opinions. You might be able to give a reason why that mightn't be the best thing. But again, it goes back to an audience being involved, or an employee being involved or more engaged. And I definitely think, there's a great book, and it's only the title of the book that I want to mention here, but it's Why Should I Be Led by You? And I think it's a wonderful book, but just for the purpose of the title, and I know it's a cliche, but leadership, it isn't about me, it's about we. But is that true in the actions? Is that true in your communications? Or are you a leader that just speaks and tells people what to do? Because if we are that type of leader, we'll always have to be there to tell people what to do. And that's not leveraging the true power of your organization, because I might have one idea, but the team members could have better ideas. So it's about exploring those and giving people the opportunity, as you said, for their voices to be heard. And they're almost certainly going to be more engaged if they have that opportunity.
We've been talking about goal setting, we've been talking about leadership, and we're talking about communications by way of presentation skills. What sort of trends are you seeing, if I was just to encompass the whole lot, just for the audience out there, that they should be aware of?
There's one big trend that I see, and it's an anecdotal trend, but I see it almost every week, Alec. And it's more and more companies are realizing the impact, the importance, and the value of coaching people. I've seen it rapidly increase in the last 4 or 5 years. And I'm very privileged to be working in a lot of different companies. And the companies that, without naming any companies here, but very well-known companies are now realizing that to bring in coaches to get the best out of people, to train their own leaders to be coaches. And it's not that we will radically maybe change a leadership style, but the value goes back to Dan Goleman. He says leaders who pass up a coaching style of leadership are passing up a powerful tool. I'll give you a simple example. I remember my partner came home once upon a time and she threw this work problem at me and said, here's a challenge that I have. And she said, what do you think I should do? And I felt I had a very, very, very valuable answer. But I said, before I tell you what I think, I said, what do you think you should do? Which is a question that a coach would ask.
Yes.
And she went, no, sorry, before I share what she said, the old me would have immediately shared my opinion, said, here's what you should do. But I was trying to be coaching because I'm so passionate about coaching. And I said, no, I won't share my opinion. I'll ask her for hers first. Because, there's a great book written by a lady called Nancy Klein called Time to Think. And she contains in that book that very often the brain that comes to you with a problem actually also contains the solution to the problem.
Oh, very good.
And so maybe that's what I was thinking about here, because I said, well, what do you think you should do? And she said, I could. And then she came up with an idea, which was 10 times better than my idea. And
good.
That's the value of coaching. And a person that comes up with the idea themselves is much more likely, much more motivated probably to act on that idea because they've created it themselves. And there's a simple example, I believe, of the value of coaching.
So I suppose as we enter into the last minute and a half of this, advice, give space to people to express themselves.
Definitely, yeah. And, I think as well, to do that, I know I've quoted quite a few authors here. I'm an avid reader, maybe as you probably contend, but Daniel Kahneman in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, speaks about two different types of thinking. He talks about the system 1 thinking, which is the easy, effortless thinking. System 2 thinking is the deeper, more effortful thinking. And I talk a lot about making time for deeper level thinking, the important things on your business. If you want to get to the big business to the next level, we do most of our regular work in that urgent system 1 thinking, the easy, effortless one, where we just do things because of skills we have. But sometimes in a week or in our months, in our years, we need to schedule time for the deeper thinking. And that's where we really maybe identify, well, what is the vision for the next 3 years? And, brainstorm with our teams, get them out of the normal everyday stuff that they're doing and work on bringing the company even to the next level. And maybe scheduling those times in the year where we're actually going to do that standard of thinking.